Oil prices are soaring as conflict in the Middle East disrupts one of the world's most critical energy routes, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway carries nearly 20% of global oil supply, making it a vital choke point for energy markets. With rising tensions and security risks, tanker movement through the strait has slowed dramatically. According to analysts, very few vessels are passing through, cutting off the flow of oil, gas, and fuel from the Gulf to the rest of the world.
The surge in prices has been driven by two key factors. The first factor is that we still see very limited, basically no vessel transit through the Strait of Hormuz, which means that a lot of the energy, oil products, natural gas, is not leaving the Middle East. It's not leaving the Persian Gulf and going through the Strait of Hormuz. And the second factor is due to the fact that this choke point is effectively closed, we are seeing that the countries in that region are exhausting their on-land storage and are having to shut down production.
As exports stall, oil-producing countries are running out of storage space. Once storage fills up, producers are forced to shut down output, leading to a sharp drop in global supply. Strikes on oil facilities across the region, from Iran to Saudi Arabia, have further damaged production capacity. Refineries, storage hubs, and export terminals have all been impacted, adding to supply fears.
What is a good oil price is extremely subjective based on, who's thinking about it. Related to, President Trump's rhetoric, I think, the duration of the conflict is essentially proportional to how high the oil price goes. So when he mentions things like, the war is pretty much complete, there is an anticipation within markets that means that, vessel passage through the Strait of Hormuz will no longer be impeded. It means that there's probably a de-escalation and no threats or attacks in the region, which then means that oil can leave, and that means more supply in the market, which pushes down prices. When he changes the rhetoric, or when the Iranian regime really inflames the rhetoric some more, it sort of suggests that there's going to be more escalation, more attacks, which means, greater threat to oil and gas related infrastructure, which then also means knocking out supply and pushing oil prices higher.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Iran, you called it an excursion. You said it would be over soon. Are you thinking this week it will be over?
No,
You're
but
talking
soon.
about days?
I think so.
Okay, and with respect
Very
to...
soon. Look, everything they have is gone, including their leadership. In fact, there are two levels of leadership, and even actually, as it turns out, more than that. But two levels of leadership are gone. Most people have never even heard about the leaders that they're talking about.
Or all around the world, the way in which people will feel it, and I think first is, at the petrol pump. Oil is obviously refined through refineries to produce critical fuels such as gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, other feedstocks that go into plastics, and also into fertilizers and even, bitumen to make roads. So all sort of parts of our infrastructure in our daily life. I think we are starting to see it first and foremost, in gasoline prices, in diesel prices, so for trucks and general manufacturing, in jet fuel prices as well, particularly in Asia right now. Prices for flights from, the Far East, such as South Korea, coming into Europe have really, really surged, since the onset of the conflict. And that's sort of the first port of call where we see the impacts, but then obviously residual impacts as well through the cost of production, the cost of electricity, which could filter through into the consumer as gas supplies are also choked off. And then, in even more, I suppose, vital ways, attacks have hit desalination plants in the region, which means that freshwater stores may become critical in the region, and also fertilizer supplies are also getting limited, which then has a knock-on impact to general food inflation and the cost of groceries.
Global oil prices surged past multi-year highs as traders priced in the risk of prolonged disruption. Even small changes in supply expectations are triggering major swings in oil markets.
There is no real will to want to have to cut your oil or gas production. But it is really now, if you cannot export it, and again, most of it flows through the Strait of Hormuz, around 16 million barrels a day of crude oil flows through there. If you cannot access that strait and move your product out, your first port of call is to try and exhaust any sort of what we call floating storage. So any vessels, ships that are in the region, try and load oil onto that first. And once that's exhausted, you try and fill in your on-land inventories and pass as much as you can to your domestic refinery system to run. Once that's exhausted, which we've seen is the case, in Iraq and Kuwait, notably right now, you then have a situation where you need to shut down your production. Otherwise, you just have an overflow or a glut of oil.
Statements from Donald Trump and Iranian leaders are also driving volatility. Any sign of escalation pushes prices higher, while hopes of de-escalation can quickly bring them down. Rising oil prices are already hitting consumers worldwide. Fuel costs for petrol, diesel, and flights are increasing, while higher energy prices are pushing up the cost of goods and services. The crisis is not just about oil. Gas supplies are also under pressure, and disruptions could impact electricity, fertilizers, and even food prices globally.
China has quite ample oil inventories. They've been building up oil inventories, notably last year, around 1.2 billion barrels. So in a sense, they have a lot more buffer. But they are also keenly looking at what happens in the Strait of Hormuz should this conflict rumble on past 1 month, 2 months, and what that then means for their strategic use of oil.
Much depends on how long the conflict lasts. If tensions ease, supply could stabilize, but if disruptions continue, the world could face a prolonged energy and economic shock.
Other countries in the region are more vulnerable. The likes of Southeast Asian countries, South Korea, really have oil inventories that span anywhere between sort of 20 to 50 days. So that really does become something quite critical. And some of the metrics they've been using is, one, trying to almost pay up and secure oil on short notice from other producing countries, as we touched upon before, and also trying to implement measures within the country to have a bit of fuel economy, implement maybe shorter work weeks, making sure that people work from home, dialing down a bit of economic activity. High oil prices do, if they sustain, lead to a bit of what we call demand destruction, and just people consuming less or being forced to consume less as well. So essentially, the G7 ministers still have this card to play, this coordinated release of about 400 million barrels of the SPR, despite how it might not be a like-for-like replacement, will still have a massive effect on the global economy, and will definitely try and keep a lid on oil prices as well.
We now look forward to your questions. Please state your name and the media you're working for. We're starting here with Paula.
The oil reserves are being held exactly for situations like this. If we are facing crisis, if we are facing disruptions of supply, that's exactly where we can intervene. We are not seeing any structural shortage of supply going forward. So from that point of view, this intervention would be warranted. So today we had the G7 discussion at the finance ministers level. So we're talking about coordinated action potentially at the G7 level, but I would say at this stage no concrete decisions are taken.
It's important not to forget all the other sort of energy streams that are being affected potentially in even more critical ways than oil is right now. One of the principal ones is, gas and liquefied natural gas, with, a key producer globally, Qatar, shutting down effectively its production through a mixture of, attacks in the region and the inability to export. About 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz on a daily basis as well. So the impact that this has on several different industries is critical.